I thought my banking app was broken. That's it. That was my first thought when I saw the words. Access denied. I tried again. Same message. Again. Locked out. And 10 minutes later, while standing inside my own bank, a manager looked me straight in the eyes and said, "According to our records, your parents now control your finances." I laughed. Actually laughed. Because no normal person expects their own mother and father to legally steal $500,000 from them. But they did. And the worst part. They almost got away with it. My name's Ryan Mitchell. I'm 42 years old, divorced, no kids, and until this happened, I honestly believed family meant safety. That belief nearly destroyed me. I spent 20 years building a business from scratch. Missed vacations. Worked weekends. Skipped birthdays. Saved every extra dollar. By 42, I finally had financial security. $520,000 saved between investments, business reserves, and personal accounts. Nothing flashy. Just years of sacrifice. Then one random Tuesday morning, my entire life got hijacked with 4 words. Access denied. Contact support. And what I discovered afterward changed how I see trust forever. Point 1 to 1 o'clock to 8 o'clock, the morning everything collapsed. You ever notice how life-changing disasters usually begin during completely ordinary moments? Nobody wakes up expecting betrayal. That Tuesday started boring. Coffee. Emails. Gym clothes on the bedroom floor. Same routine. I owned a small commercial cleaning company outside Dallas. Nothing glamorous. Office contracts. Medical buildings. Retail spaces. The kind of business nobody notices unless it stops working. But it paid well because I built it slowly and carefully. See, I grew up poor. Not. We skipped Disney vacations. Poor. I mean lights getting shut off poor. My dad worked construction. Mom worked part-time grocery jobs. And from childhood, money in our house always meant stress. Arguments. Fear. Embarrassment. I remember hearing my parents whisper fighting about bills late at night while pretending to sleep. That stuff changes kids permanently. You either become reckless with money or obsessed with security. I became obsessed. Every paycheck I ever earned had purpose. I drove old trucks long after I could afford better ones. Lived below my means. Avoided debt. Meanwhile, everybody around me kept saying, "Live a little." Funny thing about discipline. People mock it until disaster hits them. Then suddenly they wish they had it too. Now here's important context. About 8 months before the banking nightmare, I had surgery after collapsing from exhaustion at work. Nothing life-threatening. But serious enough that doctors forced me to slow down temporarily. And during recovery, my parents started helping more around my house. At first it felt nice, honestly. Mom brought food over. Dad helped organize paperwork. Typical family support stuff. Or so I thought. Now let me tell you something dangerous about trust. The people closest to you usually know exactly where your blind spots are. Mine was family. I never questioned them. Never imagined I needed boundaries with my own parents. That mindset cost me almost everything. So that Tuesday morning, when my banking app suddenly locked me out, I assumed technical glitch. Happens all the time, right? Wrong. I reset password. Didn't work. Tried desktop login. Denied again. Then came the text alert. Your contact information has been updated successfully. My stomach dropped instantly. Because I never updated anything. That's the moment fear entered my body. Real fear. Not panic yet. Just deep instinctive dread. You know that feeling when your brain senses danger before logic catches up. That feeling. I called customer service immediately. After 20 minutes of robotic hold music, a woman finally answered. Asked security questions. Then suddenly her tone changed. Cold. Professional. Sir, there appears to be an active power of attorney attached to your accounts. I remember blinking slowly. What? She repeated it calmly, power of attorney. Somebody legally authorized to act on my behalf. And according to records, it had been active for months. Months. I nearly dropped my phone. Now understand this clearly. I never signed power of attorney paperwork. Never discussed it. Never considered it. Nothing. So immediately my brain jumped to identity theft. Hackers. Scammers. Criminals. I drove straight to the bank, sweating through my shirt the entire way. And honestly, part of me still believed this would all be cleared up quickly. Simple misunderstanding. Funny how denial works during crisis. Your brain desperately searches for normal explanations while reality quietly sharpens the knife. When I arrived, the branch manager already knew my name. That scared me instantly. He escorted me into a private office. Closed the door gently. Too gently. Then placed papers on the desk. My signature stared back at me. Except it wasn't my signature. Close enough to fool systems. Not close enough to fool me. And beneath that fake signature, my parents' names. Margaret and Thomas Mitchell. I physically felt sick. Actually dizzy. The manager kept talking, but honestly, everything sounded muffled. Like my brain stopped processing language normally. Then he said the sentence I'll never forget. "Sir, your parents have already transferred substantial funds." Substantial. Such a clean professional word for emotional destruction. I asked how much? He hesitated. Never a good sign. Then quietly answered. Approximately $520,000. My entire body went cold. 20 years of work. Gone. The confrontation that broke me. People always imagine betrayal comes from enemies. No. Real betrayal comes from people whose voices comforted you as a child. That's why it cuts deeper. I left the bank shaking uncontrollably. Not crying. Not yelling. Just numb. And numbness is dangerous because your brain starts disconnecting emotionally to survive. I sat in my truck for almost 40 minutes staring at nothing. Trying to force logic into something completely illogical. Why would my parents do this? That question replayed nonstop. Then another terrifying thought hit me. What if this wasn't recent? What if they'd been planning this for months while pretending to help me recover after surgery? That thought made me physically angry for the first time. Because suddenly every memory changed shape. Mom organizing paperwork. Dad asking questions about investments. Conversations about planning for the future. None of it felt innocent anymore. Now here's where most people would call police immediately. I didn't. I drove to my parents' house first. Big mistake emotionally. Because part of me still needed this to make sense. I needed somebody to say, "There's been confusion. Identity theft. Bank error." Instead, my mother answered the door looking nervous before I even spoke. That's how I knew. Parents know when guilt's already visible. I walked inside without permission. Dad was sitting at the kitchen table drinking coffee like it was a normal Tuesday. And honestly, that image still makes me angry. Because my entire life was exploding while he calmly stirred cream into coffee. Then I said, "Tell me this isn't real." Silence. Long silence. Finally my father sighed heavily and said something unbelievable. "We were protecting the money." Protecting it. That's the word he used after stealing $500,000 from his own son. I laughed again. Not because anything felt funny. Because shock does weird things to people emotionally. Then my mother started crying instantly. But here's something important I learned that day. Tears are not always proof of innocence. Sometimes people cry because consequences finally arrived. She kept saying, "We thought you were spiraling. You weren't making good decisions. We got scared after your surgery." Scared. I was 42 years old. Running my own business. Paying my own bills. Managing my own life. But in their minds, I was still controllable. That realization changed everything psychologically. See, some parents never stop seeing adult children as property. Not people. property. And once I understood that, my entire childhood suddenly looked different. Dad controlling every financial decision. Mom using guilt any time I became independent. Subtle manipulation disguised as concern. I missed it for decades because dysfunction feels normal when you grow up inside it. Then came the sentence that shattered whatever trust remained. Dad leaned back calmly and said, "It's family money anyway." Family money? No. I earned every dollar myself. Every freezing morning. Every 12-hour shift. Every sacrifice. Mine. But entitlement rewrites reality for selfish people. Now here's where things got darker. The money wasn't just sitting in another account. Parts of it were already gone. Paid toward their debts. Credit cards. Home renovations. My father had even invested some into a failing business idea from one of my cousins. Without asking me, I felt rage in a way I'd never experienced before. Not explosive rage. Worse. Cold rage. The kind that changes how you see somebody permanently. And the hardest part. My mother still expected emotional sympathy. She grabbed my arm crying, "We're still your parents." That sentence hit hard because biologically she was right. Emotionally, I wasn't sure anymore. Family without trust becomes emotional theater. Everybody keeps pretending roles still matter while love quietly rots underneath. I walked out before saying something unforgivable. But outside in my truck, I finally broke down completely. Not over money. Over realization. The people I trusted most viewed my success as accessible property. That pain goes deeper than theft. Way deeper. 0.3 to 1,500 hours to 2,200 hours, the secret they never thought I'd discover over the next 2 weeks. My life became legal paperwork, frozen accounts, and non-stop anxiety. Lawyers. Fraud investigators. Bank meetings. And let me tell you something exhausting about financial betrayal. It invades every part of your life. You stop sleeping normally. Stop trusting normally. Stop relaxing completely. Every notification feels dangerous. Every phone call spikes adrenaline. Meanwhile, my parents kept calling nonstop. Voicemails. Texts. Emotional manipulation disguised as apologies. My mother's favorite line became, "We did what we thought was best." That phrase haunted me. Because controlling people always frame manipulation as love. Now, during the investigation, the bank's fraud team uncovered something shocking. The fake power of attorney wasn't created recently. It had been drafted 6 months earlier. 6 months. That meant while I was recovering from surgery, while my mother brought soup over, while my father sat beside my hospital bed, they were already planning access to my money. That realization destroyed me emotionally. Because suddenly kindness itself felt suspicious. And honestly, that's the cruelest part of betrayal. It poisons future trust too. Then investigators discovered something even worse. My parents weren't the masterminds. My Uncle Gary was. Dad's older brother. The family. Business genius. Every family has one. The guy constantly chasing shortcuts and investment opportunities. Gary had previous fraud accusations years earlier that mysteriously disappeared. And apparently after hearing about my savings, he convinced my parents they deserved access. Before something happened to me. That's how greed spreads inside families. One selfish person whispers entitlement long enough, eventually weak people start believing it. But here's the twist nobody expected. The fraud investigation uncovered hidden recordings. My father accidentally left voicemails discussing transfers with Gary. And in one recording, my mother admitted they knew I never approved the documents. Game over. Suddenly the same parents begging forgiveness started panicking legally. And for the first time in my life, I saw fear in my father's eyes. Real fear. Not authority. Not confidence. Fear. Funny how power disappears once consequences arrive. But what happened next changed me even more than the theft itself. Because during all this chaos, I discovered who actually cared about me. The people who show up after betrayal, you want to hear something strange. The worst moments in your life reveal people with terrifying accuracy. Not during success. Not during parties. Not during holidays. During collapse. That's when masks fall off. After the fraud investigation started, my phone became weirdly quiet. A lot of people disappeared fast. Some relatives avoided calling completely because they didn't wanna pick sides. That phrase made me sick. Pick sides? One side committed fraud. The other side got robbed. What exactly was complicated? But dysfunction inside families creates bizarre loyalty systems. People protect comfort over truth all the time. Especially older generations. My Aunt Cheryl actually told me, "You shouldn't ruin your parents' lives over money." Money. Again with that word. Like this was just dollars. No. This was identity theft. Forgery. Manipulation. Years of deception. And honestly, comments like hers made me realize why toxic families survive for decades. Because everybody pressures the victim to stay quiet so the group can avoid discomfort. That realization changed me deeply. Now during this mess, somebody unexpected stepped up for me. My ex-wife, Lauren. Yeah. The same woman I divorced 4 years earlier. Funny how life works sometimes. We weren't enemies after divorce. Just disconnected. No cheating. No dramatic scandal. We simply grew apart emotionally after years of stress and work. But the second she heard what happened, she called immediately. And I'll never forget her first sentence. "Ryan, this is not normal." Simple words. Huge impact. Because after enough manipulation, victims start questioning their own reality. You begin wondering, am I overreacting? Am I too emotional? Maybe they meant well. That's psychological damage. Lauren snapped me back into reality immediately. Then she said something that honestly hurt but was true. "Your parents controlled you longer than you realized." Boom. There it was. The truth nobody had ever said directly. And once she said it, I couldn't unsee it. The guilt. The pressure. The subtle emotional control my whole life. Even financially, my parents always positioned themselves as authority figures no matter how successful I became. And I allowed it because somewhere deep down, I still wanted their approval. That realization hit hard. Because millions of adults still emotionally perform for parents who never fully respected them. Now here's where things got emotionally complicated. Lauren started helping me organize documents and legal records. Long nights. Take-out food. Stacks of paperwork across my dining table. And slowly we started talking differently again. Not romantically at first. Honestly. Just honestly. Without ego. Without old arguments. Trauma strips fake communication away fast. One night around midnight she looked at me and said, "You know why this hurts you so much?" I answered immediately. "Because they stole from me." She shook her head. "No. Because you still wanted them to be good people." That sentence wrecked me emotionally. Because she was exactly right. See, betrayal from strangers creates anger. Betrayal from parents creates identity confusion. Your brain literally struggles to process it because parents are supposed to represent safety psychologically. When they become the threat instead, your nervous system goes into chaos. That's why I couldn't sleep. Why every memory suddenly felt suspicious. Why my childhood replayed differently in my head every night. Then one evening Lauren found something buried inside old paperwork boxes. A life insurance policy. My father had taken one out on me after my surgery. Large policy. Without ever discussing it. Now legally, some policies involving business agreements or family situations can exist normally. But paired with forged power of attorney paperwork. It felt terrifying. Especially because investigators already suspected long-term financial planning behind the fraud. That discovery shifted everything emotionally. For the first time, I stopped viewing my parents as simply desperate. And started seeing how dangerous entitlement can become when mixed with greed. Then came the phone call that changed the entire case. The bank's fraud investigator called and asked, "Mr. Mitchell, did you know your father attempted another transfer after accounts were frozen?" I nearly dropped the phone. Another transfer. Meaning even after confrontation, even after getting caught, they still tried moving money. That's when something inside me emotionally snapped shut. No more confusion. No more guilt. No more protecting them mentally. Just clarity. And clarity feels cold after manipulation finally breaks. The dinner that ended my family a week later, my mother begged me to meet one last time. Said she wanted peace. Closure. Understanding. Classic emotional language people use when consequences finally scare them. Honestly, I almost refused. But part of me needed final answers. So we met at a small Italian restaurant halfway across town. Neutral territory. Dad arrived looking older instantly. Stress aged him fast. Mom looked exhausted from crying for days. And for a second, I almost felt bad. That's the confusing part about family betrayal. Love doesn't disappear immediately just because trust does. Your heart and brain fight each other constantly. Then dinner started. Awkward silence. Silverware sounds. Nobody touching food. Finally, my father leaned forward and said, "You have to understand something." No apology yet. Notice that. Still explanation first. Then came the sentence that changed everything permanently. "We sacrificed our lives raising you. We deserved security too." There it was. The real truth. Not protection. Not concern. Entitlement. Pure entitlement. And honestly, that sentence explained my entire childhood suddenly. Every guilt trip. Every controlling comment. Every subtle pressure around success. My achievements were never fully mine emotionally. In their minds, I owed them forever for raising me. Now let me say something important because millions of people need to hear this. Parents choosing to raise children does not create lifelong ownership rights. Children are not retirement plans. Not emotional support systems. Not financial insurance policies. Healthy parents want independence for their kids. Unhealthy ones fear it. And sitting there across from my parents, I realized they never truly saw me as separate from themselves. That realization hurt more than losing money. Then my mother started crying again, saying, "We were scared you'd leave us behind." I answered honestly, "I already did emotionally years ago. I just didn't realize it." Silence. Heavy silence. And for the first time in my entire life, my father looked small. Not physically. Emotionally. Like a man finally realizing control and love are not the same thing. Then he quietly asked, "So what happens now?" That question mattered because suddenly everybody understood something. The old family dynamic was dead. No resetting. No pretending. No holiday photos fixing this. Gone. And honestly, I felt grief more than rage in that moment. Because losing parents emotionally while they're still alive creates a weird kind of mourning. You grieve people who technically still exist. Then I told them calmly, "I'm continuing the case." My mother cried harder instantly. Dad just stared downward silently. And for the first time ever, I chose myself over their emotional comfort. That moment changed my life permanently. Because boundaries feel cruel when you've been conditioned for guilt your entire life. But boundaries are often the first real act of self-respect. I stood up to leave. Then my mother asked one final question. "Do you still love us?" Man, that question nearly broke me. Because the honest answer was complicated. Love existed. But trust was dead. And without trust, love starts suffocating eventually. So I answered truthfully, "I don't know what I feel right now." And then I walked out. Not dramatically. Not angrily. Just finally awake. The legal case lasted almost 11 months. Longest year of my life. Eventually most of the money was recovered. Not all. Some disappeared permanently through bad investments and debt payments. But honestly, by the end, the money mattered less than the lessons. Because betrayal changes you in ways success never can. First lesson: trust should be earned continuously, not granted automatically through titles, family, friends, relationships. None of those labels guarantee safety. Character does. Second lesson: a lot of people confuse control with love. Parents, partners, even friends sometimes. Real love respects boundaries. Manipulation destroys them. Third lesson: rock bottom reveals identity clearly. Before this happened, I measured life through money and productivity, business growth, account balances, work success. But after nearly losing everything, I realized peace matters more than performance. And here's the craziest part: the fraud forced me into therapy eventually. At first I hated it honestly. Felt weak. Embarrassing. Typical male ego stuff. Then slowly therapy helped me understand something huge. I wasn't just grieving stolen money. I was grieving the fantasy of who I thought my parents were. That's deeper pain. Way deeper. Because once illusions die, you either grow emotionally or stay bitter forever. I chose growth. Slowly. Painfully. Imperfectly. And over time my entire life changed. I sold the cleaning company eventually. Started consulting instead. Worked fewer hours. Even reconnected emotionally with people I ignored for years. Including Lauren. Funny enough, the collapse that nearly destroyed me ended up exposing everything fake in my life. And honestly, that saved me. Because now my peace isn't attached to approval anymore. Not from parents. Not from money. Not from anybody. That freedom feels priceless. If this story hit you emotionally, comment the word boundaries below. Because sometimes the hardest truth in life is this: the people who raised you can still hurt you deeply. And protecting your peace does not make you selfish. If you've ignored red flags in relationships, family, or finances, pay attention now. Because manipulation always grows in silence. Subscribe for more emotional true stories, shocking family drama, betrayal stories, and life-changing moments that remind us trust is earned, not inherited. The phone call I never expected. About 6 months after the legal settlement, my phone rang at 6:12 in the morning. Nobody calls that early with good news. My first thought was somebody died. Then I saw my cousin Jake's name. Now understand something. Jake was Uncle Gary's son. The same Uncle Gary who helped orchestrate the fraud. We hadn't spoken since everything exploded. I almost ignored the call. Almost. But something told me to answer. And the second I heard Jake's voice, I knew something was wrong. He sounded exhausted. Scared. Then he said, "My dad's gone." At first I thought he meant dead. But no. Gary disappeared. Completely. Left town overnight. Apparently federal investigators had started looking into unrelated financial scams connected to him. Multiple victims. Forged paperwork. Stolen retirement funds. Turns out my case wasn't unique. Not even close. And suddenly something terrifying clicked into place emotionally. My parents didn't invent this behavior. Gary normalized it. Manipulative people survive by slowly reshaping morality around them. That's how good people cross lines they once feared. Little compromises. Small justifications. Tiny lies repeated long enough. Eventually wrong starts feeling reasonable. Jake sounded broken. And honestly, for the first time in this entire nightmare, I stopped thinking only about myself. Because kids of manipulative parents suffer differently. They spend years cleaning up emotional damage they never created. Jake admitted his dad financially ruined him too. Opened credit cards in his name years earlier. Destroyed his credit. Used guilt anytime Jake resisted. Hearing that changed my perspective completely. Because suddenly my family dysfunction stopped feeling isolated. It was generational. Passed down quietly through control, guilt, and emotional manipulation. That realization matters. Because healing becomes impossible until somebody breaks the pattern. Then Jake said something I'll never forget. You were the first person who finally stood up to them. Boom. That hit hard. Because honestly, I never viewed myself as strong during all this. Mostly I felt exhausted, confused, angry, heartbroken. But sometimes courage doesn't feel courageous while you're living it. Sometimes courage feels lonely. And that's important for people watching this right now. Setting boundaries with toxic family rarely feels empowering immediately. Usually it feels painful first. Like grief. Like guilt. Like betrayal. But pain and growth often arrive wearing the same clothes. Now, after that phone call, I started reflecting differently on my childhood. Memory after memory resurfaced. Dad controlling conversations. Mom using emotional silence as punishment. Financial guilt anytime I succeeded independently. And here's the dangerous thing about emotional manipulation in families: kids normalize it automatically. You don't question what feels familiar. You adapt. Then adulthood comes, and suddenly your entire emotional operating system is damaged. You over-explain yourself. Fear disappointing people. Struggle saying no. Feel guilty for protecting peace. That was me for 42 years. And honestly, millions of Americans live exactly like that right now without realizing it. Then one random afternoon, Lauren asked me something uncomfortable. Do you even know what healthy love feels like? I opened my mouth to answer, and couldn't. That silence told me everything. Point 7, 48:00 to 55:00. The hardest thing I ever did. A few months later, my mother got sick. Not life-threatening, but serious enough for hospitalization. And suddenly everybody expected me to rush back emotionally like nothing happened. Family pressure returned instantly. Texts. Calls. Guilt. She's still your mother. Life's too short. You'll regret staying angry. Notice something. Nobody said. She should apologize sincerely. Interesting how families often pressure victims harder than offenders. Now let me be clear. I didn't want revenge anymore. That phase passed. But forgiveness and access are not the same thing. That distinction changed my life. So after days of internal conflict, I visited the hospital. And honestly, walking into that room felt harder than court hearings. Because legal betrayal hurts financially. Parental betrayal hurts psychologically. Mom looked smaller in the hospital bed. Fragile. Human. Not the controlling figure from childhood. Just old. And suddenly I understood something terrifying about adulthood. Eventually your parents become emotionally fragile too. That complicates everything. She started crying immediately when she saw me. And this time, it felt different. Less defensive. More real. Then she whispered, I ruined our family. First fully honest sentence I'd heard in months. No excuses. No justification. No manipulation. Just truth. And strangely enough, truth softens anger faster than apologies sometimes. We talked for nearly 2 hours. About childhood. Money. Fear. Everything. Turns out after my surgery, my parents became obsessed with mortality. Dad especially. Terrified something would happen to me before they felt financially secure. And instead of processing fear healthily, they chose control. That's the tragedy of emotionally immature people. They solve fear through manipulation instead of communication. Still wrong. Still unforgivable in many ways. But understanding why people hurt you changes healing completely. Not because it excuses behavior. Because clarity frees your mind from endless confusion. Then my mother asked me something heartbreaking. Were we really that bad parents? Man, that question crushed me emotionally. Because life isn't black and white. They weren't monsters. That's what makes this complicated. They loved me in many ways. Cheered at baseball games. Worked hard growing up. Provided food and safety. But unhealthy love still creates damage. And millions of people struggle admitting that because society pushes extremes. Either parents are saints or villains. Reality is messier. Some parents genuinely love their children while simultaneously controlling and emotionally harming them. Both things can exist together. That truth took me years to understand. So I answered honestly. You loved me. But you also controlled me. Silence filled the room instantly. Then, for the first time in my entire life, my mother nodded instead of defending herself. And weirdly enough, that moment healed something inside me. Not completely, but enough. Because accountability changes everything emotionally. Then came the hardest part. Before leaving, my mother grabbed my hand and asked, "Can we ever be family again?" And honestly, I didn't know. Some wounds heal. Others scar permanently. But I finally understood something important. Healing doesn't always mean restoring relationships fully. Sometimes healing means accepting reality without hatred. That's different. Very different. Solutions/insight 55:00 to 1 hour and 1 minute. What true wealth actually is. You know what's funny? For years I believed financial security would protect me emotionally. I thought enough money meant enough safety. But life taught me something brutal. You can have $500,000 and still be emotionally vulnerable if boundaries don't exist. Real security isn't only financial. It's psychological. It's knowing who deserves access to you, who respects your peace, who only loves you conditionally. That awareness changed everything. I stopped chasing approval completely after this experience. And honestly, life became lighter. Not easier. Lighter. Huge difference. I learned how to say, "No. That's inappropriate. I'm not discussing this. I need space." Simple phrases. Life-changing power. Then something unexpected happened. My relationship with Lauren slowly evolved again. Not dramatic movie-style romance. Slower. Healthier. More honest. Because for the first time in my life, I stopped performing emotionally. No pretending strength. No hiding stress. No people-pleasing. Just honesty. And honesty attracts healthier relationships eventually. Now here's the biggest lesson from everything. The bank account wasn't the real theft. The real theft was emotional. Years spent believing my value depended on productivity, obedience, and approval. Once I broke free from that, I finally understood peace. And if you're watching this right now struggling with toxic family dynamics, hear me carefully. Protecting yourself is not betrayal. Setting boundaries is not cruelty. And loving someone does not require unlimited access to your life. That realization saved me emotionally more than recovering money ever did. If this story hit you emotionally, comment the word peace below. Because sometimes the strongest thing you can do is stop sacrificing yourself to keep dysfunctional people comfortable. And remember this, not everybody who says family acts like family. Real love respects boundaries. Real love tells truth. Real love does not steal your peace. Subscribe for more emotional true stories, shocking betrayals, family drama, and powerful life lessons that remind us healing starts the moment we stop ignoring reality. The day I stopped being afraid of disappointing people. You know something most people never admit out loud. A lot of adults are still emotionally controlled by childhood fear. Not fear of violence. Fear of disappointing people. That was me for most of my life. Even after the fraud, even after court, even after betrayal, part of me still worried about being seen as the bad son. That conditioning runs deep. Especially in families where guilt gets mistaken for loyalty. Now around this time, word about the lawsuit spread through extended family completely. And suddenly I became the villain in some people's version of the story. Funny how that works. Not the parents who forged documents. The son who exposed it. My cousin Melissa posted vague Facebook quotes about forgiveness, family mistakes, pride destroying relationships, classic passive-aggressive family behavior. And honestly, Old me would have panicked emotionally. Would have tried explaining myself. Defending myself. Winning approval. But something had changed inside me finally. I was tired. Not physically. Emotionally tired. Tired of shrinking truth so other people could stay comfortable. Then came the annual family barbecue. The first one since everything exploded. And yes, I went. Not because I missed anybody. Because avoidance keeps wounds alive sometimes. I needed to walk into that environment differently than before. Now the second I arrived, I felt it. The whispers. The awkward greetings. People pretending nothing happened. Families are incredible at performance. Everybody smiling while tension suffocates the room. Then Uncle Steve approached holding a beer and said, "You know your dad's heart is broken." Interesting statement. Not, "You were betrayed." Not, "You went through hell." No. Back to protecting the parent emotionally. That's when I realized something important. A lot of people don't actually care about truth. They care about restoring comfort. Huge difference. Then Uncle Steve said, "You gotta move on eventually." And for the first time in my entire life, I didn't soften myself to keep peace. I answered calmly, "I did move on. That's why I have boundaries now." Dead silence. You could literally feel people listening nearby. And honestly, that moment felt terrifying and freeing simultaneously. Because people conditioned for guilt experience honesty like rebellion. Then something unexpected happened. My younger cousin Rachel quietly pulled me aside later. And what she told me stunned me. Apparently multiple relatives experienced financial manipulation from Uncle Gary over the years. Small loans, pressure tactics, business scams. But nobody spoke openly because the family normalized silence. That's how toxic systems survive. Everybody quietly tolerates dysfunction until one person finally refuses. Rachel looked at me emotionally and said, "You saying something gave everybody permission to stop pretending." Boom. That sentence stayed with me for weeks. Because standing up for yourself publicly doesn't only change your life. Sometimes it exposes patterns other people were silently surviving too. And honestly, that's when I stopped feeling ashamed completely. Not because I won. Because I finally understood something huge. Truth tellers often become family villains temporarily. Especially inside dysfunctional systems. Now later that night something happened that surprised me emotionally. Dad approached me alone near the backyard fence. No audience. No performance. Just us. He looked older again. Smaller somehow. Then he quietly said, "You're different now." And without thinking, I answered, "No. I'm finally honest now." That sentence hit both of us hard. Because deep down, he knew it was true. For decades I shaped myself around other people's expectations. Good son. Responsible one. Reliable one. Meanwhile, real emotions stayed buried under obligation. And honestly, that destroys people slowly. Then Dad asked me something unexpected. "How do you stop feeling guilty?" Man, that question broke my heart a little. Because suddenly I didn't see an authority figure. I saw a scared aging man emotionally trapped by his own unresolved life. And for the first time ever, I realized my father probably spent his entire life confusing control with protection because nobody taught him differently. Generational pain is real. Doesn't excuse behavior. But understanding it changes anger. I looked at him and answered honestly, "You stop feeling guilty when you realize peace matters too." He didn't respond immediately. Just nodded slowly. And honestly, that tiny moment meant more to me than fake dramatic apologies ever could. Because growth usually happens quietly. A few weeks later, I visited the bank again to finalize remaining fraud recovery paperwork. Same branch. Same office. Same building where my world shattered months earlier. Funny how places hold emotional memories. Walking back inside felt surreal. But this time, I wasn't shaking. That mattered. Growth sometimes reveals itself through calmness where panic used to live. Now, while waiting, a woman around my age approached carefully. Bank employee. Her name tag said, Angela. She smiled nervously and asked, "Are you Ryan Mitchell?" I immediately felt defensive. After everything that happened, surprise conversations made me suspicious automatically. But then she said something unexpected. "I just wanted to thank you." Thank me? Turns out Angela overheard parts of my fraud situation months earlier. And hearing it pushed her to confront financial abuse happening inside her own family. Her adult son had been secretly using her accounts for years. Small amounts. Manipulation. Guilt. Again and again. And like many parents, she kept excusing it emotionally because confronting reality felt painful. But after hearing my case, she finally stopped enabling it. That conversation hit me deeply. Because once again I realized something important. People silently tolerate emotional and financial abuse everywhere. Inside families, relationships, friendships. And most victims don't speak because society romanticizes family loyalty over personal well-being. Angela started crying quietly while talking. Then said, "You made me realize love without boundaries becomes self-destruction." That sentence honestly gave me chills. Because it summarized everything I learned the hard way. See, unhealthy people weaponize closeness. They use history, guilt, obligation, shared blood, whatever creates access. Meanwhile, healthy love respects limits naturally. No manipulation required. Now, before leaving, Angela asked, "Do you regret exposing them?" And I answered immediately, "No. I regret ignoring warning signs for years." That distinction matters. Because deep down, I always knew something felt emotionally off in my family. I just normalized it. Like millions of people do every day. Then driving home afterward, I realized something strange. For the first time in decades, my life actually felt like mine. Not controlled by approval. Not driven by fear. Not organized around keeping everybody else emotionally comfortable. Mine. That freedom felt unfamiliar initially. But beautiful too. Then later that night Lauren asked me something unexpected. "Do you think everything happened for a reason?" Now usually I hate that phrase. People use it carelessly around pain. But honestly, I understood what she meant. Because if the fraud never happened, I probably would have stayed emotionally asleep forever. Still chasing approval. Still avoiding boundaries. Still measuring worth through productivity. The collapse exposed everything fake. Painfully. But clearly. And clarity changes lives. You know what keeps most people trapped in unhealthy relationships? Hope. Not weakness. Hope. Hope that parents will change. Hope that toxic people suddenly become healthy. Hope that one more sacrifice finally earns respect. I lived like that for 42 years. And honestly, that kind of hope becomes emotional prison eventually. Because real healing starts when you stop negotiating with reality. My parents loved me imperfectly. That's true. But they also violated trust deeply. Also true. Both realities can exist simultaneously. Mature healing accepts complexity. Now here's the biggest shift I experienced after everything. I stopped seeing boundaries as punishment. That's important. A lot of emotionally manipulated people think boundaries mean revenge, cruelty, disrespect. No. Boundaries are clarity. They simply define what behavior gets access to your life. That's it. Nothing dramatic. And once I understood that, everything changed emotionally. Conversations became calmer. Relationships became healthier. Stress dropped massively. Because pretending dysfunction is normal requires enormous emotional energy. Then something amazing happened slowly. I started reconnecting with myself. Old hobbies returned. Travel. Cooking. Music. Simple human things I ignored for years while trapped in survival mode emotionally. And honestly, that's what betrayal steals first. Not money. Joy. But joy can return when truth enters your life. Even after collapse. Especially after collapse sometimes. If this story hit you emotionally, comment the word truth below. Because healing begins the moment you stop lying to yourself about what people are doing to you. And remember this, you can love people deeply, and still refuse to let them destroy your peace. That's not cruelty. That's emotional maturity. Subscribe for more emotional true stories, shocking family betrayals, powerful life lessons, and unforgettable comeback stories that remind us sometimes losing trust is the first step toward finding yourself again. About a year after the fraud case ended, life finally felt stable again. Not perfect. Stable. Big difference. The constant anxiety disappeared. My sleep improved. Business pressure dropped. And for the first time in decades, silence didn't feel lonely anymore. That's how you know healing starts happening. When peace stops feeling empty. Now my relationship with my parents became distant but respectful. Very limited contact. Careful conversations. Strong boundaries. No pretending everything magically healed. Because real life isn't a Hallmark movie. Some damage changes relationships permanently. And honestly, accepting that gave me more peace than forcing fake closeness ever did. Then one winter morning, I received a text from my father. Short message. No greeting. No small talk. Just this. I finally understand why you were angry. I stared at that sentence for a long time. Because for most of my life, my father never admitted emotional fault directly. Ever. Then another message arrived. I spent my whole life believing control was love because that's what my father taught me. Man, that hit deep. Because suddenly the entire generational chain became visible. My grandfather controlled my father through fear and authority. My father repeated it through money and guilt. And if I never woke up emotionally, I probably would have repeated it somehow too. That realization changed everything. See, trauma doesn't always look dramatic. Sometimes trauma looks like emotional habits passed quietly through generations. Silence. Control. Manipulation. Conditional love. People inherit emotional patterns without realizing it. Then accidentally hand them to their kids. That's why awareness matters so much. Now over the next few weeks, Dad and I slowly started having more honest conversations than we ever had in my entire life. Not comfortable conversations. Real ones. About fear. Failure. Money. Regret. Turns out after losing construction work years earlier during a recession, my father developed deep financial insecurity he never processed emotionally. To him, money meant survival. Control meant safety. And somewhere along the way, he stopped seeing emotional boundaries clearly. Again, not excuse. Explanation. Huge difference. Then one night during dinner he admitted something painful. When you became successful, I started feeling useless. That sentence broke my heart honestly. Because suddenly I realized something tragic. My success unintentionally triggered his deepest insecurities. And instead of communicating vulnerability, he chose control. That's what emotionally immature people often do. They manipulate instead of expressing fear honestly. Now here's the powerful part. For the first time ever, I didn't feel responsible for fixing his emotions. That was growth. Old me would have immediately comforted him. Minimized my pain. Protected his ego. New me simply listened calmly. Because empathy and self-abandonment are not the same thing. A lot of people confuse those two things. You can understand someone's pain, without allowing them unlimited access to yours. That lesson changed every relationship in my life afterward. Then Dad asked quietly, "Do you think we would have destroyed things this badly if we actually talked honestly years ago?" I answered immediately, "No." Because silence feeds dysfunction. Always. Families don't collapse overnight. They collapse through years of avoided truth. And honestly, most people watching this right now probably understand that deeply. A few months later, Lauren and I took a weekend trip to Colorado. Nothing fancy. Cabin rental. Snow. Cheap diner breakfasts. Simple. And one morning, while sitting outside drinking coffee watching snowfall, Lauren asked me something that caught me completely off guard. "What are you chasing now?" I opened my mouth, automatically ready to say business growth, financial goals, retirement plans, then stopped. Because for the first time in my adult life, I wasn't chasing survival emotionally anymore. I wasn't trying to earn approval, prove worth, avoid guilt. I was just existing peacefully. That realization almost made me emotional. Because some people spend their whole lives in emotional survival mode without recognizing it. Always performing. Always pleasing. Always fixing. Exhausting way to live. Then Lauren smiled and said, "You finally seem calm. Not happy. Calm. And honestly, calm is underrated. Especially after chaos." Now later that same day we stopped at a small bookstore in town. And while browsing randomly, I found a quote inside one of the books that felt like somebody punched me emotionally. It said, "Children raised around guilt learn to confuse love with responsibility." I just stood there staring at those words. Because that sentence explained my entire life. For decades I thought love meant sacrifice, obligation, fixing everybody else emotionally. Meanwhile, healthy love actually includes respect, honesty, safety, freedom. Huge difference. And suddenly I understood why my relationships changed after healing. I stopped tolerating manipulation entirely. Friends who only called during emergencies disappeared. Guilt-driven family dynamics weakened. Work stress dropped because I stopped tying self-worth to productivity. Healing spreads into every corner of life eventually. Now here's the craziest thing. Losing access to $520,000 felt catastrophic initially. But emotionally, the real recovery happened when I stopped needing validation from people incapable of giving healthy love consistently. That freedom became priceless. Because once fear of disappointing people disappears, your entire life changes. You speak differently, choose differently, rest differently. You finally become yourself. If you remember anything from this story, remember this. Not every toxic relationship looks abusive from the outside. Some look caring, protective, helpful. That's what makes emotional manipulation confusing. Especially inside families. People can love you and still damage you deeply through control, guilt, or entitlement. Both things can exist together. And healing starts when you stop forcing yourself to choose only one truth. My parents loved me imperfectly. They also betrayed me deeply. Both real. Life becomes healthier when you accept complexity honestly. Now another important truth. Financial abuse inside families happens way more often than people realize. Parents, children, siblings, partners, and victims stay silent because shame keeps them trapped. But silence protects dysfunction. Truth exposes it. That's why boundaries matter so much. Not because boundaries destroy families. Boundaries reveal which relationships depend on control to survive. Big difference. And finally, here's what changed my life most after everything. I stopped measuring wealth through numbers. Real wealth is peaceful sleep, healthy relationships, freedom from manipulation, the ability to say no without guilt. That's real security. Everything else can disappear overnight. If this story meant something to you, comment the word freedom below. Because sometimes losing trust is the exact thing that forces you to finally find yourself. And remember this carefully. You are not responsible for sacrificing your peace just to keep unhealthy people comfortable. Real love respects boundaries. Real love values honesty. Real love never requires self-destruction. Subscribe for more emotional true stories, shocking family betrayals, powerful comeback journeys, and life lessons that remind us healing begins the moment we choose truth over fear.